Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission is simple. We take a pile of information, could be research, articles, maybe even your notes, and, well, we cut through the noise.
Yeah, we try to pull out the most important stuff for you, our listeners.
Exactly. We want to be your shortcut to being genuinely well-informed, maybe with a few surprises, hopefully.
And today we're picking up where we left off, diving back into this really interesting article series on what the authors called the losing art of proving security.
That's right. In the first part of this deep dive, or if you read the first article, we really wrestled with the, let's say, the foundational, more theoretical side of things. We looked at defining a secure policy, building a mathematical model of a system, and then using formal methods within that model to actually prove mathematically that your security holds.
But only under specific assumptions and conditions, right, in that abstract world.
Exactly. It's the bedrock, showing security can work in a controlled, almost perfect setting.
But the real trick, the art they're talking about, is bridging that gap. How do you take that proof, that theoretical certainty, and make it work in the messy reality of actual computers and networks?
Okay, so that's exactly what this second part of the article gets into. It pivots pretty hard from the theory to the practice.
Yeah.
What do all those mathematical statements, those assumptions and conditions actually mean when you're trying to build or secure a real system?
Right. This is where the theory kind of gets its hands dirty. The article explains that making this proof-based approach actually work involves interpreting that theoretical proof stuff through a couple of different lenses to really guide how you build things.
Okay. So the first interpretation, we covered that before, was taking the plain English security policy and turning it into that very precise formal security model.
Defining subjects, objects, access types, all that.
And now, the next really critical step is taking the conditions, the things the proof said had to be true for the policy to work in the model, and translating those into concrete, practical requirements for a real automated system.
So what hardware do you need? What software features? What organizational steps even? What do you need to make those theoretical conditions actually hold true in the real world?
To make it less abstract, the article uses a really common example, a client-server automated system, which is helpful. We can all sort of picture that.
Yeah, think about the pieces. You've got the workstation where the user is running its OS, running a client app, like a database client. Let's use SGBD like the article does for the database system.
Okay, SGBD client. Then on the other side, there's the server. It's got its own OS, and it's running the server part of the SGBD, managing the data.
And linking them is the communication bit, the network, cables, switches, maybe routers, plus the software drivers on both ends that handle talking over that network.
And we can't forget the physical stuff they mentioned too, like the PCs themselves, the server hardware, the network gear, and really important for security, the storage media.
Right. Backup tapes or drives, safe places for master copies of software, tools for checking system integrity, the audit logs themselves. All of that physical stuff is part of the system we need to secure based on the proof.
Precisely. So the article then goes through those assumptions and conditions from the theoretical model, one by one, and shows what they look like in practice. Let's start with the assumptions.
Okay. These were the things assumed to be true in the model for the proof to even work, right?
Exactly. Foundational properties. Like assumption one, every active process, every subject has one unique parent process that started it.
And how does that become real?
Well, they point out that most operating systems fundamentally work this way. The whole process creation mechanism, fork and exec on Unix-like systems, it naturally creates this parent-child link. The OS has to understand subject as a process acting for someone.
Okay, makes sense. Assumption two. The idea that the system just functions as a sequence of subjects accessing objects. So practically, this means the OS and the whole system architecture have to support these basic ideas. Objects like files or data, subjects like processes linked to users, and crucially, access happening through defined, controlled interfaces.
You can't just poke memory directly, usually.
Right. Though the article does mention a practical caveat here, this model usually applies after the system is booted up and the security stuff is running, maybe not during the initial seconds of startup.
Good point. Assumption 3 was about the administrator, a single, unique admin with full rights to common stuff, who, importantly, doesn't just hand those full rights over to someone else improperly.
Yeah, and the translation here is interesting. It's not just a technical rule setting. The article says this is realized mainly through organizational measures.
Ah, like policies and procedures.
Exactly. Defining the admin's duties, what they can and can't do, making sure those rules are followed so that this core idea of controlled ultimate authority isn't broken in practice.
Okay. Assumption 4. Shared objects, things multiple processes might access, can't be used to leak information sneakily. No hidden channels.
For this, the article suggests you need to use OS tools specifically designed to prevent those kinds of leaks. Things like controlling shared memory access, temporary file handling, and like anything security critical, the admin needs to manage these tools.
Got it. And the last one, assumption 5. The basic sequence when a subject tries to access an object, the system checks the rules, ownership, group, permissions, and either lets it happen or stops it right there.
And this core behavior, they say, is implemented way down deep. It's the processor hardware working with the OS security kernel. They often bring up the reference monitor concept here.
The gatekeeper.
Exactly. The part of the system that theoretically checks every single access attempt against the rules before letting it proceed.
Okay, so if those assumptions hold in the real system and the security policy is followed, the proof suggests unauthorized access shouldn't happen. But making sure those assumptions do hold and the policies followed in the messy real world, that's the challenge.
That's precisely where the 3 key conditions come in. These were the things the proof showed were necessary and sufficient for the policy to be enforced in the model. So, making these conditions true in the real system is how you bridge the gap. It validates the assumptions and makes the policy stick.
Right. Let's tackle condition 1, identification and authentication. Seems pretty basic.
It is fundamental, but the details matter. It means every user needs a unique ID. The article actually suggests at least 6 characters, which sounds a bit dated now, but the principle holds.
Okay, unique ID and authentication.
Verified identity, usually via a password. Again, they suggest at least 6 characters. And crucially, where this needs to happen.
Right.
In their client server example, you need that ID and password check to log into the workstation OS, then again to log into the server OS, and a third time to get into the database server session itself. Layers.
Layers of authentication makes sense.
And they add practical requirements, too. That password shouldn't be just lying around on the workstation's disk unprotected, and it needs protection when it travels over the network, like using encryption. Basic stuff, but derived directly from needing strong authentication for the proof to hold water.
Okay. Condition 2 is about the authorization subsystem.
Right. This translates pretty directly. The access control systems on all the important bits, the servers, the network gear if it has controls, the workstations, they have to exist, obviously, but they also need to be switched on and set up correctly.
Enabled and configured.
Yeah. This system is the enforcer. It has to block the bad stuff, the unauthorized access, while letting the good stuff, the authorized access defined by the policy, go through.
Got it. Then condition 3, which you said the article really flags as critical, absence of bypass paths.
This is often the hardest one in practice, I think. It means every single way someone might try to get at protected information must go through that authorization system.
No backdoors.
No backdoors, no side channels, no clever tricks to get around the checks. Every path leads through the gatekeeper, the reference monitor.
Wow. Okay, how do they suggest you ensure that in a real system? That sounds really difficult.
Well, they recommend 2 main technical strategies: using detailed audit logs and doing regular integrity checks on the system components.
How does that help?
The idea is if the core system files, the OS, the database software, haven't been tampered with, that's the integrity check part, and the logs show every access attempt being properly mediated and recorded, that gives you confidence that no one snuck around through some hidden technical memes.
Visibility and verification.
Exactly. And they get specific about the logging needed. The server OS logs user session star10. The workstation OS logs user session star10. The database server logs user session star10.
All restricted access, presumably?
Oh yeah, access to those logs needs to be tightly controlled admin or auditor only. Because the logs themselves are sensitive security data.
What needs to be in the logs?
Key details. Timestamp, time and date of login, logout, system start, system stop, the result, success or failure, and the user's identifier code or name. Enough to reconstruct who tried what, when, and whether it worked.
Okay, so logs and integrity checks handle the technical bypass paths. What else?
They also mention non-technical measures. Things like physically tracking all the media that holds protected info, backup tapes, USB drives maybe, labeling them, keeping a logbook.
Physical tracking.
Yeah, and preventing regular users from being able to just modify the system software code. And maybe the most basic but essential, controlling physical access to the rooms where the servers and network gear actually live. locks on doors, access control.
Right. Can't bypass the software controls if you can just walk up and unplug the server or steal a backup tape.
Exactly. So you see how it builds up technical requirements for the software and hardware, procedural requirements like keeping logbooks, and physical security, all stemming from that one theoretical condition: no bypass paths allowed. Meeting these conditions is how the theory becomes a protected reality.
Okay, that leads us nicely to the final practical step the article talks about in Section 6, which is configuration.
Right, because, having an operating system or hardware that has the features, it can do authentication, have an authorization system, it can log things, that's not enough by itself.
It doesn't magically secure anything just by existing.
Precisely. Those features, those mechanisms, have to be correctly set up for your specific organization and its specific security policy.
This is where the rubber meets the road then.
That's exactly what the article calls it, the crucial final practical step. It's translating the organization's very specific rules like Alice can read file X but not write it. Bob in accounting can access the finance database between 9 and 5 into the actual settings.
So setting up the access control lists, the database permissions, maybe firewall rules, user groups, all that stuff.
All of it. This configuration step is where the general requirements that came out of interpreting the proof get applied to the unique situation of this specific system, this specific company. It's what actually activates the theoretical security in the real world.
And it sounds like it requires real skill.
Oh, absolutely. You need a deep understanding of what the system can do, how its security tools work, and what the security policy actually demands to make sure every switch, every setting, is aligned with enforcing those proven conditions.
Okay, so let's recap the whole journey the article lays out. It starts with defining a really clear security policy.
Then building that formal mathematical model of the system.
Using proofs techniques to figure out the theoretical assumptions and the practical conditions needed for the policy to actually hold in that model.
Then the big translation step, interpreting those assumptions and conditions into concrete requirements for the real-world hardware, software, OS features, even organizational rules and physical security.
And finally, the hands-on part.
Yep.
Implementing those requirements by meticulously configuring all the security tools and settings available in your specific system to match your specific policy rules.
Exactly. It's quite a comprehensive process they describe.
The article finishes up by sort of contrasting this proof-based method with other common approaches.
Yeah, like just doing risk analysis, figuring out what might go wrong, and patching the biggest holes, or simply aiming for compliance, ticking boxes against a standard like ISO 27001 or NIST guidelines.
And how do they position the proof-based approach relative to those?
They frame it as potentially more rigorous, maybe more demanding upfront, but offering a stronger kind of assurance because it's grounded in that formal proof, not just best practices or risk assessment. An intermediate step, they suggest.
What really struck me, though, was the historical connection they made at the end. It was kind of surprising.
Oh, the link to the old standards? Yeah, that's fascinating.
They point out that this whole methodology, defining policy, modeling the system, proving conditions, hold this is actually how some of the foundational security standards first came about.
Like the U.S. Department of Defense Orange Book, the Trusted Computer System Evaluation Criteria from way back in 1983.
Right. Its requirements for different levels of trusted systems that could actually guarantee they supported certain security policies, were directly based on this kind of formal modeling and proof work.
So that rigorous approach, trying to prove security properties, actually formed the bedrock for the standards-based, more compliance-focused approach that many organizations rely on today.
The checklists we often use now are kind of descendants of that deep, formal effort to mathematically demonstrate security in abstract models.
Which really does raise a big question for you, the listener, to think about, doesn't it?
Yeah. If the standards we rely on so heavily today actually grew out of these formal proofs based on system models, how much might we be losing if we only focus on the compliance checklist now?
Especially with today's systems being so incredibly complex, interconnected, and the threats evolving constantly.
Does just meeting the standard, ticking the box, miss a crucial layer? Maybe that foundational layer of assurance that comes from really understanding and applying these proof-based principles, even conceptually.
It's definitely something to ponder as you think about security in your own context. It suggests security isn't just about the tools or the standards,
but maybe also about understanding the fundamental principles that make a system truly verifiably secure. Food for thought.